thing which I just recently, Jim and I just had a comment on my blog when he mentioned that it would be um, you're going to have certain aspects of existence that must be inferred. And the best example currently being dark matter, dark energy. They observe the physical universe out there, and with every empirical evidence that we've been able to gather, and with every scientific principle that we apply to that information, we infer that there must exist 90% of the universe is invisible. It's dark matter. It's not even perceptible to us, but it must be there in order for us to exist in the state that we exist currently. So it's not so far-fetched to think that consciousness is manifest through the brain and through our cognitive function and through our body sensors and the central nervous system, that it could completely feasible that it could entail aspects and components that are not perceptible to us directly. And that, I think that's the foundation of what you're trying to say there. It certainly is something that has, in order for us to know anything, it has to be manifest in the temporal. We can't simply conjure something out of nothing and say, well, there it is. Everything that we know, everything that we feel, everything that we sense, all of our abilities as cognitive creatures rely on our brain and our cognitive system, but they could clearly be interacting with, in some capacity of which we are not currently aware or perceptive of, elements and components that are not physical, that are not temporal.
Yeah, but you got anything in response to that, Toby?
I guess something I was thinking of as that conversation was going on was to do with how exactly we can try to reproduce consciousness in machines, or at least try to, and see what results we get. And I mean, the Turing test, you've probably all heard of it, it doesn't seem like a perfect example. John Searle said that if you've got a machine that just spits out words, it might not actually be conscious. But I don't know that it was, the Chinese room is a very good representation of what's going on in the brain. That's a very, very simple model of what would be generating language. If we get a good enough model of what the brain is doing and manage to produce that in a machine, and it does, for all intents and purposes, really behave quite consciously, even to the point where we can ask it to visualize, say, the African savanna and tell us what it sees, and it can carry on a conversation that kind of way. We would have to start thinking that it seems to be forming mental images and representing these things and able to communicate them in a way that we would have to be getting close to saying that it is conscious, admitting that it is conscious, I would think.
Yeah, and I think that almost, like, how John, before you had been like, you don't know. It's that the idea of whether or not a machine is conscious is part of the same question you would have as if I'm conscious or anyone else you're talking to is conscious. But that, when you're talking about inferring something, that's something we can really infer, right? Like, I don't have really evidence that you're conscious, but that is something that I should infer. Like, based on all of, my based on even just like common sense reasoning, I should infer it that you're conscious. So if we had a machine that exhibited consciousness in the same respect that we did, we would probably have to infer, or it might be wise to infer, that it had similar internal experiences to ourselves, right? Like,
right now, it sounds on the surface of it to be a reasonable conclusion. The problem I have with it mostly is that we were not manufactured in the same way that such a machine would have to be. We have spent hundreds of thousands, millions of years evolving as biological creatures, and finally, after hundreds of millions of years, I guess you'd say, we finally started to have a cognitive apparatus attached to our nervous system that was made it possible for us to be self-aware. And I agree to a certain extent that my inability to confirm in the same way that I can confirm my own consciousness, I can't confirm yours, but so enough alike me. You're certainly animated, and I think it's safe to say you're alive, and you're breathing. You're a biological creature, and if consciousness is something that only is possible to experience if you are alive, if you are a living thing, then it certainly wouldn't be possible for a machine to be conscious at that point. But what you're saying is it good enough? Is a machine that can interact with me and have a conversation like we're having, and I'm sitting here going, darn, that machine, that sure sounds a lot like Rick. You know, he responds in the same way, he tells the same corny jokes, he's still he's an amazingly smart fellow, but he's not alive. And I'm just saying it as a personal point of view to me that the living is a requirement for experience to perceive and to comprehend and to appreciate the fullness of our existence, to be self-aware, is something that requires life. I mean, you have to be alive. That's just my opinion. I'm not saying.
And this kind of brings me to a question for Toby, and then it will wind up that I'll end up with Jim, because it's like I think they both kind of address this in much different ways. So for Toby, like it's my perception, and you're going to tell me, like you could inform me. You know what I mean? You're pursuing a PhD in artificial intelligence, so you'll know far more than I would. But it's my interpretation that AI's really hit a bottleneck, right? Like the systems that we're coming up with are they're very good at what they do, but they're not exhibiting the same kind of intelligence you would see in human beings. Like I saw this guy, neuroscientist again, David Eagleman, his name was, and he was talking about Watson, right? And he like the computer quiz game, and he said, Watson can answer all these questions, but it can't answer a question like if you asked it, if Barack Obama enters a room, does his nose go with him? It can't answer that question. So it's like it's incredibly good at kind of like putting information together, but it doesn't have awareness in that sense. So it's like it seems like what's happening is that they're hitting a bottleneck, and in order to try to get around this bottleneck or break through the bottleneck, they're turning to the way that the brain works to try to re-engineer from the way the brain works to get to their goal of AGI, artificial general intelligence, or whatever. Is that am I correct in that interpretation, or am I off? Like where, or am I off? And where am I off?
I think there's quite a bit of truth in that. Going down the path where they have with Watson, where they're basically just using an enormous database of written words, and have a very very powerful algorithms and a lot of computers working in parallel just to crunch the words and try and find relationships and set probabilities to what the answer of a question might be. It's doing natural language processing in a sense, but it's not doing it in a natural way at all, I don't think. So yes, there are.
So it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be conscious or intelligent. It would just mean that it's a different kind of intelligence, and whether or not it's conscious is still a matter of some speculation.
Yeah, it's certainly a very narrow type of consciousness, I would say. Broader than maybe than what has been developed before, so broader than Deep Blue, the chess playing computer, but still quite narrow. It probably wouldn't understand pictures and those sorts of relationships, like you said, Rick, about Obama walks into a room, his nose goes with him. And there are lots of researchers trying the other approach of looking for more natural ways of forming representations and finding patterns in the world. So I did write an article and have looked into a bit these deep neural networks that seem to be doing a very good job, staying to do a very good job of recognizing images and translating language, let's say Chinese to English.
Now, do they work